Move on to the next stage is when typically the vendors will ask for a planning session. They call it scoping, kickoff, initiation, various names, but the idea is to work with you to establish a plan of what to audit and how. So again, a couple of things to look out for is, what is the actual scope, right? So if IBM or Oracle come in and audit you, would you want to accept a scope to say, oh, I want to be auditing everything Microsoft, everything IBM, everything Oracle? Or should we really be checking our license contracts and say, you know what, we've only bought these type of software from you, and then you don't have the rights to audit everything else? So that's the scoping part worth considering. Whether you want to include any overseas subsidiaries, so we touched on this a little bit. Again, can be a double-edged sword. If you include, if you encourage the vendor to conduct an audit or globally, and if you happen to be an organization that spends globally, then it can potentially play into your favor by delaying the starting of the audit because the vendor needs to organize themselves. But it can also be basically passing your problem to your colleagues overseas. So it's kind of a double-edged sword worth considering. NDA used to be a very powerful weapon in terms of protecting yourselves, but a lot of the vendors nowadays are very smart. They built in NDAs into their latest agreements. Some of them haven't. So again, if you haven't got an NDA already in place with the vendor to allow such activities for audit, then potentially that will be something to raise to say, hey, how do we make sure the data we collected, the findings remains confidential? Lastly, it's about timeline. So some different vendors approach this differently, but some of the more aggressive ones we're trying to word the language to say that you are now officially notified for audit. You have to comply in 5 days, 10 days, 15 days. You have to do this by then. Otherwise, you're in big trouble. Some of them will word their letters like this, but by the end of the day, I'm not saying all, but vast majority of the license agreement you sign up to doesn't give the vendor the right to dictate a time frame as long as it's reasonable. Obviously, you can't say no to them forever, but also equally, you're not obliged to meet a unreasonable timeline as well. So don't get too pressurized by that and then feel that you have to play in according to the vendor's demands on timeline. So a couple of things to watch out for in this in the initial scoping and planning stage.